It is June 14th. Not a whole lot going on in the NFL world, certainly not with the Houston Texans, except that this week we were blessed with all of a sudden it became Relive 2020 on the internet. Bussin' with the Boys interviewed Randall Cobb, so he dished on just how miserable it was for him in Houston at the time. And Bill O'Brien was on Next Up with Adam and Brenneman, which he was a guy that played for him at Penn State. And Bill O'Brien talked about his time as general manager along with some other guy. He wouldn't name Jack Easterby by name. Randall Cobb wouldn't name Jack Easterby by name either. Hi, Lori. Good to see you. I'm glad you made it. I know you have a hard time making the live streams, probably because you're actually working for a living, unlike some of me. But also, we had the treat of, on TikTok, the account, the School of Hard Knocks, which is this guy that goes around and asks successful people as they're getting out of their Bentleys or as they're, lounging on their mega yachts. He just kind of ambushes these guys, rich people, and asks them how they made their money and how they sustained success and all that kind of stuff. And he chose Cal. Cal was one of his targets this week. We can talk about the conspiracy theories some of you have that this was staged. Frankly, I don't care, but this is Cal McNair being ambushed by the School of Hard Knocks.
Is this your G-Wagon?
Yeah.
What do you do for a living out in Houston, Texas to be able to afford a G-Wagon?
Sorry?
What do you do for a living out in Houston, Texas?
Work hard.
What industry are you in?
Football.
What are you doing exactly?
Own a football team.
What team?
Houston Texans.
You own the Houston Texans.
H-Town, baby.
And how long have you been a business owner for?
We've had the Texans for 20 plus years.
Over the 20 plus years you've been a business owner, what's the greatest lesson that you've learned about entrepreneurship?
Never quit.
How did you break into the National Football League, man? It's very competitive to try to get into that business. How did you break in and ultimately work your way up to be able to own a team? What did it take?
Oh, well, we were very successful in another business.
What business?
And then sold it, the power industry, sold it. And then my dad actually bought the Texans as a franchise expansion. Back in 2002 was our first year.
What was the best advice that you ever got from a mentor?
Conserve your cash.
Now, did you have to borrow money to start and grow businesses, or like?
There was leverage involved. And then opportunities happen. You hopefully have some cash, you can take advantage of them.
How old are you now?
I am 63, but don't tell anyone.
Are you a billionaire?
I haven't added it up.
You're probably a billionaire though. So what makes you happy?
I have a lot of happiness, a lot of joy in my life from family and believing the man upstairs and all those things kind of work together.
And any negotiation advice? You've negotiated some massive deals. What's the secret to negotiating?
You want to do it, but not that bad.
What do you mean by that? You got to be able to walk away or what?
That's Cal, the newly beloved Cal McNair. He's just doling out business advice. I know the first thing that a lot of people think when they see that is obviously, all right, well, Cal didn't earn the money and buy the team, so it's not like this isn't great advice for lifting yourself up into a position of wealth or anything. But he does have some good business advice. I would say the first part, as far as whether or not that was staged, I don't think so. When Cal is first getting out of his car, he looks a little bit kind of perplexed, maybe skeptical. It's not that rare for people to get looted in the Galleria area these days. So I don't think it was staged. If it was, I thought he did a good job with it. Plus, the guy's questions were very, those are the same questions he asked everybody. It wasn't like he was really responding or changing his questions based on the answers that Cal gave him. The guy also didn't, I don't know which other football team he would have owned in Houston, Texas. But, well, of course, the Adams family, formerly the Adams Strunks, those guys all live here. So it could have been the Titans owners, I suppose. The cash part. Keep cash on hand. This is important because I do think the Texans have operated in a way since Cal took over that is better than the way a lot of the family-owned teams are run. There are some family-owned teams in the NFL where the team is very much their sole income, and the team operates that way because the owners get really stingy because that's my cash. That's my money for the new Bentley for my third girlfriend or all that stuff. The Texans have not operated that way. I think Cal lives like a pretty non-extravagant lifestyle. He has a nice house and everything, but it's not like they're out just living a Jerry Jones style lifestyle. And they have spent pretty liberally on fired coaches, fired GMs, fired pretty much everybody, not to mention dead money on players, but really they've also spent pretty aggressively on player improvement programs, things that some owners are honestly kind of stingy with. Cal has spent that money, but it also, when you have that cash on hand, it allows you to walk away from mistakes, which is a big part of professional sports. Is you're going to have to walk away from a Jose Abreu, for instance, at some point. The teams that don't have cash on hand, it gets tougher and tougher to make those decisions. Not to mention that when you guarantee a contract in the NFL, you have to hold a certain amount of cash in reserve. So when you're trying to compete for free agents or anybody else, you've got to have enough cash just to sit. You got to park it in escrow. Like you got to. So these billionaires who know how to make money on money, they have to take a bunch of money and get the money market rates, which is not nearly as bad as it used to be. If you want to look at the bright side of inflation, leverage. Yeah, they. I don't know. I would have been more interested in hearing what kind of leverage they used when Bob McNair created Cogent, because that was the business that he ended up selling to make the money to be able to buy a football team. When you use leverage to buy a football team, it's just because there's a good spread between the interest you're paying on the loan and the money you're going to make off the football team. So it's not like they mortgaged the house to buy the football team. Oh, and then in any negotiation, be ready to walk away. I finally figured that out when I was like 40 years old, that, okay, I can't go into a negotiation really, really wanting something. You just got to be able to walk away from it. So good job by Cal. I don't know that this wouldn't have been received as well in 2021 or 2020, which is what we're going to talk about today, because Randall Cobb was on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast with, was it Will Compton and it's Taylor Lewan, two former Tennessee Titans. And he relived the glory that was the 2020 season. So we'll go over that. I want to be sure I get to some of your comments before we do this. Let's see. A lot of people saying hello. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, you get to watch it live from the start. I announced it like 5 minutes before I came on. I don't know. You guys have noticed I'm not very good at planning these things with any regularity. Let's see. Cal seems much smarter now. I remember when we called him Tommy Boy. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing how, look, in the NFL, as far as asking for business advice from an owner, and especially one who inherited the team, I think you would have to be so bad at owning a football team to not make money on the football team. That was one of the criticisms of the Texans forever, was that, they only cared about making money. They're really good at creating revenue, but they need to get wins. And yeah, they still do need to win a Super Bowl here somewhere along the way. But but on the business side of actually like operating the functional football team, hire a good GM, hire a good head coach, have a really good quarterback. Like, it's that simple. Everything else falls into place. I was watching some guy on the internet that popped onto my screen who was talking about starting a business and how you guys got to really identify the one thing you can do that will make people really crave your product, and everything else falls into place after that. In football, it's the three simple yet really, really hard things to do are get the right GM, get the right head coach, and just go out and get a CJ Stroud. No big deal, right? Or Trevor Lawrence, apparently, according to the Jaguars. Let's see. Seth, would you do the morning show and afternoon show if they paid you double? I have a hard enough time doing this like every other week for an hour or so. Isn't beds upgrades the bubble too? I think that might be a voice to text, Lori. I'm not sure. So, Randall Cobb, former Houston Texans wide receiver, who was more victim than cause of all of the dysfunction and disarray that this team was going under in 2020 through 2022. He was on the Bussin' with the Boys podcast with Will Compton and Taylor Lewan, two former Tennessee Titans. And it's been hard. It's been hard for me because I hold on to this football hate, and I had a lot of football hate for Taylor Lewan for a while. But now that he's been out of the league long enough, I can appreciate him as a really good podcast host. Randall Cobb, let me get my notes up here so I don't screw up the order of this stuff, everybody. Randall Cobb, to set the timeline, remember he signed in 2020. It was right at the beginning of COVID. And he described, let's see, here we go. Okay, so Randall Cobb signed with the Texans in 2020 after having a really good and kind of a resurgent year with the Dallas Cowboys. He signed in 2020. Here's how all that went down.
I got a bone to pick with the Texans.
Son of a bitch.
We're going on Miami.
This is
What
EJ
is the
Speed.
bone? What is the bone to pick? Because you know you have them week 1.
Hold on. Here's EJ Speed first.
In Indy. They're coming
yeah, they said I didn't make any plays, so I guess I gotta put the proof in the pudding, huh?
Yeah, and CJ Stroud likes to talk.
Yeah, that's his thing now. That's his thing. He like to pop his shit. I mean, can we say he got a right to?
Okay.
In my mind, I'm like this.
All right, I got it. Sorry, Jason. I hope you didn't leave yet. Tell me if the volume's good now. I swear to God, I'm gonna bash things after this with the issues I've had with the volume. He brags about a sack in week 2. I know. I know. BG, tell me if the mic is okay now, because I think I got it fixed. There we go. Okay, good. Me and this audio on this damn podcast. My God. I'm going to have to clean this up later when we put this out for the masses. All right, here we go. Randall Cobb.
In my mind, I'm like, this is a great situation. They got D-Hop. I can go and, work the slot beside him. And then, like, my first red flag should have been when they traded D-Hop, right? They traded D-Hop while we were finishing up our negotiations. And I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't, like, why would they do that? Like, it just didn't make sense at the time. But obviously.
Crazy trade, too.
Yeah, it was a crazy trade. You guys might remember that, the old DeAndre Hopkins trade. This is the interesting thing about this. With the timeline of it, Sean Pendergast and I went over it. They were in the middle of negotiations for the D-Hop. Randall Cobb and his agent were in negotiations with the Texans. And maybe they had already kind of agreed verbally, but the deal didn't go through until after DeAndre Hopkins was traded. And I think that speaks a little bit to just how aggressively and weirdly the Texans were spending money at the time. They gave him 3 years, $27 million. The Cowboys offer, and Randall Cobb didn't talk about any other offers, was 3 years, $18 million. And the Cowboys had offered $12 million guaranteed. The Texans had offered $18 million guaranteed. So maybe Cobb would have bailed on it if the money was closer, if the Texans hadn't spent so exorbitantly on so many guys that were getting overpaid while Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby were the GM. But just to listen to Randall Cobb in this interview, and I've got the link to it below, the Bussin' with the Boys full interview of Randall Cobb. It really brought me back to just how weird the entire situation was, because this was right at the start of all the COVID lockdowns. And the NFL didn't know if there was going to be a draft, if there was going to be a season. There was a lot of weirdness at the time, and Cobb spoke about just how weird that was.
That happens, and then I end up signing. But remember, that's the COVID year. There's no off season. Bill O'Brien's calling me like, "Hey, man, I don't know if we're gonna have a season this year. Like, I don't know when to tell you to come down here." And then I remember he called me like a few days later, like, "Hey, I'm gonna need you down here like ASAP. Like this thing, we get ready to do it." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Like,
so at that point, this was 2020. Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby had been acting as like they wouldn't admit it in 2019, and they named Bill O'Brien the actual GM in 2020. It was all so weird. And yet at the same time too, I think we were all a little bit distracted back in those days. And you're trying to figure out exactly how they're going to come off of this playoff run that they had the year before. And the Texans hadn't really done anything to help a defense that had just completely and totally folded in that playoff game. But you added a Randall Cobb, Laramie Tunsil that you had added the year before, and Deshaun Watson was starting to come into his own. But you weren't even sure if there was going to be a season. The season did begin. The Texans, as you'll recall, started off 0-4. And Randall Cobb, who only had to be here for one season, basically described that entire season from his perspective in about 30 seconds.
we started the season 0-4, and they fire O'Brien. And in my mind, I'm like, what did I just saw this entire place blow up. Like, I saw the making of it. I saw it happen, and I saw the dust settle. Like through that season, after that season, that's when they brought in. They hired Coley as the head coach, who hadn't been a coordinator.
Oh, he hadn't been a coordinator. He was the passing game coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, who had a horrible passing game the year before. But it didn't make any sense other than if you're hiring what you knew was going to be an interim coach of some sort. And in hindsight, that's what it was. I think that is and remains maybe one of Nick Caserio's bigger mistakes, in that I think they saw the writing on the wall. Caserio knew what the salary cap situation was and that they had to reset. You're a quarterback at that point, didn't have any public sexual misconduct allegations against him, but he had requested a trade, and there were none of the really good candidates were going to come in and sign on to whatever the hell was going on with the Houston Texans. So I think that if they had hired Lovie Smith that year, that would have made a lot more sense as somebody that could instill some kind of culture and keep some semblance of stability. But with Culley, and Randall Cobb was very polite when he talked about Culley. He had a few more comments here. But I think in him just pointing out that Culley had never been a coordinator, he wasn't going to be the guy. We knew that in Houston. It's only Houston Texans fans that understand that none of us were actually blaming David Culley for why the Texans were a mess. He was a symptom, not the disease. It was like the hiring of David Culley and the way that team operated that year, with Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby as co-GMs, and eventually just Jack Easterby as the interim GM. It just that was in the complete mess of it all. I don't blame Randall. I've got no ill will in my heart for Randall Cobb either. I'm not going to call him a poor guy because he made out like a bandit with the amount of money the Texans paid a guy who'd been getting 500 yards receiving at a clip. So again, in hindsight, if you want to look at when, like, as ugly as it would be for the next couple of years, it was a bit of a turnaround if you listen to Randall Cobb talk about how he felt when he met Nick Caserio. So Cobb had been there in 2020 for that season. Caserio gets hired in January of 2021.
And the first time I met Caserio, I knew he was like, he's the guy. Like he's gonna fix this place. His first day, I remember, of the offseason that year, he had 27 transactions on day one of free agency. I was like, oh, he's getting ready to flip the roster, like completely flip it. And so I go through that offseason. Right before training camp, we are getting ready to go out for the conditioning test. And they come and grab me and bring me up to the office. Hey, you're getting traded back to Green Bay. And like, I just had the biggest smile on my face.
Yeah, that was his dream to go back with his guy, David Culley. I think I said David Culley for different people 8 various times, to be back with his guy, Aaron Rodgers. The whole discussion has my eye twitching, or maybe I had too much coffee. Could be both. It could be both. There's, I don't think, no player leaves a sour taste in Texans fans' mouth more than Ed Reed. Right. Yeah, like Randall Cobb was what he was. I think there were a lot of the signings that Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby did together where, again, they were symptoms. They weren't the problem. Like Whitney Merciless got that nice extension, and everybody loves Whitney Merciless. I love Whitney Merciless. He was not at a stage in his career where he was going to command that kind of money from anybody else, and it was just a needless extension. Nick Martin in that extension, when he would end up like struggling to find a job 2 years later. Some of the other players that they brought in that they paid really, really good, like Eric Money, they paid him like he was a starting cornerback in the league, a proven starter, where he'd been kind of a utility defensive backfield guy. It was the multitude of errors that they made that, and we'll hear from Bill O'Brien later, that I've got a little bit of a beef with, other than I'd like, not emotional, I'm not like pissed off about it or anything. But it was just that multitude of things that all added up. Next was Cobb on how things were conducted differently than in Houston and in Green Bay and Green Bay and in Dallas.
And then when you go to Houston and you see the way that things are being done, and like you can't do anything about it, and you're just stuck in it. You're like, there's no outlet, like, and on top of that, it's COVID. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. We're getting tested every single day. Like, I think it was just a whirlwind of like bad. And it was a shitty place.
I almost cut out it was a shitty place. Yeah, it was a whirlwind of bad. It was a whirlwind of bad. And this is the thing about NFL coaches and GMs and when they operate the way they did in 2020, which was like Bill O'Brien knew the risk of what he was doing. They were going all in on a few things, including the DeAndre Hopkins trade, and just trying to play this parlay mentality where, well, if we can just do this one kind of unconventional thing, and if that works out, and then if this other unconventional thing works out, and then if this other low probability things work out, then we'll win the Super Bowl. And they were spending so much for so little that he knew, like, because he'd be an idiot if he didn't, and he's not an idiot. He knew that the risk was he was going to get fired if this didn't work out. They were doing so many things unconventionally and weirdly that it was either going to work or it was going to blow up in his face. And like, players and coaches get to leave the whirlwind of bad. The fans don't. Like, the fans don't get to leave the whirlwind of bad. Randall Cobb got traded away. We're stuck here for 2 more years living through that whirlwind of bad that Randall Cobb described. That's the thing that, aside from everything else that I like about DeMeco Ryans, the thing that's really rare in the NFL is that you have a head coach who specifically wants to be in the city in which he's coaching. Like, that his wife is from here and he played here, and that he always wanted to get back here. They were his number one choice last year when he would have had multiple suitors, including the Denver Broncos, no matter how much some people shout that it wasn't the Broncos. So that part of it, not that necessarily means that he's going to be better because of it or what have you, but I think in terms of like being a fan of a team that has seen what it went through and just like how mercenary Bill O'Brien was in the way he operated in a lot of ways, it's just one of the ways that DeMeco Ryans is way different, amongst others, and I'm very grateful for it right now. What was Houston lacking compared to the Cowboys and the Packers, the 2 teams that Randall Cobb had been with?
Well, I think direction. Bill O'Brien was not only the head coach, he was the GM as well, right?
Yeah.
So now you lost your head coach and your GM. Now who's running things, right?
Right.
Like, and it was a crazy situation with, a guy that they had put in place there, who had kind of went from being a team chaplain to the interim GM, which is wild.
Jesus, take the wheel. That's a song about that.
Yeah, it's wild. I can kind of relive some of this now without getting angry about it and just try to look at it from a different perspective. And there were so many times when Bill O'Brien and Jack Easterby were in charge where I really would look around and wonder if I was going crazy, because there were so many things that were so absurd and just didn't make any sense at all that, I don't know how you guys are. That whenever I'm feeling that way, I feel like, well, maybe I'm the stupid one. But then I would check and confirm, and nope, pretty much everybody. And I would call guys around the league, and they're like, oh, nobody knows what the hell they're doing. I don't get it. I don't get it at all. I'm just happy to be through with it. I'm really, really happy to be through with it. One last thing. This made me feel a little bit better about Bill O'Brien in one respect. This is framed as a negative, but I kind of like that this is what Bill O'Brien would say to Taylor Lewan, who, when he was a player, I despised Taylor Lewan. I like him now as a podcast host. I despised him when he was a player.
He is that dude, man. He's a dude that talks shit on the sideline as a head coach.
Right.
I'd be jogging by, and he'd be like, fuck you, Lewan. Like,
Yeah.
fuck you, Bill. He said, what's your name? That whole thing. I was not a fan.
Yeah, I kind of like that. I don't like it when Bill O'Brien would do it to anybody and everybody, but that part I kind of like. If you found out, if your team is good and you find out that your coach is talking that to a player that you despise, that's hard not to like. And that's where Bill O'Brien, like, honestly, just to talk to people who worked with him or were around or anything else or played for him, it's not like he was a complete D-bag all the time. I think he was a volatile guy, and he's the guy that could still be that guy from the sideline outburst with Tom Brady, but he could also be like a super thoughtful, quiet, reflective guy. And he's just the phrase I heard from multiple people at various times was he's just a completely unique individual. He is a very unique human being. And I think, playing some of the clips that we're about to play, he's recognized where his faults have been in the past. I don't know how much he's going to work out of it or if he's going to be different with the kids at Boston College. But man, he's just he is a unique dude. Yeah, a lot of you shared my same thoughts. My thought was I'm just a fan. I must not know anything about football. Lori asking what brought this up with Cobb to be looking back. I think he was on with Bussin' with the Boys, and it was like probably an hour-long interview, and they were just kind of going through his career. So he was just reflecting back on that. I don't think it was like because of it. I don't think it's because his non-disclosure agreement ran out or anything like that. We are traumatized from their decisions, using our love for the team and the city against us. Houston versus everybody else forever. LOL. Yeah, I'm just glad we all got through it together. And we're in a different place now. We're in a better place. We can actually watch Taylor Lewan without getting physically angry the way I used to. He spit on TJ Watt too, not to mention that. As a player, I had issues with him, but but now he's got kind of that 80s firefighter look that's popular with the kids these days. So as far as Bill O'Brien talking about it, Bill O'Brien was on Next Up with Adam Brenneman, who was a guy that played for him at Penn State. And Christian Hackenberg was on Adam's show that day as well. This is Bill O'Brien saying something that after years of reflection, he now knows something that we knew the whole damn time.
Yeah, that was a tough time in Houston. We were a good team. We made some decisions relative to the organization to try to fill the GM role. We went after some guys. We couldn't get them. And at the end of the day, we went a full year, I think, without a GM, really. Yeah. Myself and another guy did it. And then there was a year where they were like, well, we're just going to, make you the GM. So in the end, that's not who I am. That's another lesson learned, right? Like, I didn't really enjoy being the GM. I didn't enjoy negotiating contracts. I in some respects, I lost relationships with some of the guys that I was coaching, because I didn't really enjoy that. In my opinion, there's very few guys in the history of football that can ever do that. Yeah. And they're the greatest of the greats. I feel like I'm a good coach. I know how to coach. I think you guys know that. But those things I'm not great at. I can evaluate talent. I know how to evaluate talent, but I shouldn't be negotiating contracts and things like that. So in the end, that was a mistake by me, and I wish I really didn't do that, to be really honest with you.
All right. And, now this is where I wonder how much he's coaxed that a little bit, even though he's admitting that it was a mistake for him to be the GM. This presentation of it like it was something that was forced on him, and that it wasn't something he ever wanted. Like, let's remember, they fired Brian Gaine with a plan to replace Brian Gaine, likely with Caserio. He says there was a few other people they wanted, but I think that was really the start of when O'Brien seized control, wanted control, needed to have his porridge just right. It couldn't be some other bum GM that he'd have to work with and listen to and get in arguments with. So this was his creation. Like, let's not get that twisted. That was his creation. And I think that kind of started the chain reaction of it at that point when Jack Easterby, who's this beacon of toxic positivity who can, convince you that as long as you're thinking outside the box, it's a good idea. Thinking outside the box is awesome as an exercise to find good ideas and be selective in which ones you choose. Jack Easterby is that type of guy who thinks that just because it's outside the box, that it's innovative and it's smart and it's a great idea and that David Johnson's going to be as good as he was 5 years ago, or any manner of those things. They put out a press statement that that the DeAndre Hopkins trade, people are underestimating and undervaluing the second round pick the Texans got back. They'll pick a guy who will be a long and productive player for a long time for the Houston Texans. That player was Ross Blacklock. It was complete lunacy. It was absolute and total lunacy. So I agree with him that he shouldn't have been GM. And I feel bad that he didn't enjoy being GM, but we didn't enjoy it far more. So I can empathize with him times 10 on how miserable it was for him as the GM. But that was his own creation. I'm not going to sit here and act like, oh yeah, it was forced upon him. That was your deal. Next one was Bill O'Brien just pointing out that it wasn't all bad with him and Jack Easterby as GM.
Look, when we were running it at the Houston Texans, yeah, we made some controversial decisions, but we made some good decisions too. We traded some top picks for Laramie Tunsil. Laramie Tunsil is one of the greatest left tackles in the history of the game, in my opinion. And he still plays there. I don't think he gave up many sacks this past year. Yeah. So there's other examples of guys that we brought in there that were really good players that we made decisions as when I was general manager or when I was doing it with somebody else. So it wasn't like it was all terrible. Now, the media narrative is it's terrible.
Trust me, I know.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, O'Brien just hit me with the old, hey, not every Jose Abreu at-bat is a bad at-bat. Yeah, we're talking percentages here, man. Your batting average sucked as a GM, all right? Yeah, not every move was bad, but I'll tell you this, too. The same thinking that got Laramie Tunsil here was the exact same thinking that created a lot of the other bad moves. It was like an overly aggressive either buy or sell. And that was the constant overpaying or underselling on so many things over time that just snowballed. Yeah, I would include the Randall Cobb contract into that. The thinking that David Johnson was going to be your every down bell cow. All of these little things, yeah, they start to add up. So just doing like one or two good things, it's no different than a bad baseball player, the GM of a team telling you that a bad baseball player is actually good because he's batting 137. All right, I told you I wasn't going to get emotional or angry about this, and then I did. This is that the Laramie Tunsil trade working out. You can't count that as like an indication that, oh yeah, it was actually pretty. It wasn't as bad as everybody played it out. Because it's like a Jameis Winston throw where Jameis Winston makes a lot of incredible touchdown throws, but it's the exact same process leading to those throws that also leads to him throwing 30-plus interceptions in a season. That's how Jameis Winston was the only player ever to have 30-plus touchdowns and 30-plus interceptions in the same season because it was the exact same thinking going into everything. I promised you guys I wasn't mad about it, and now I am. The Jack Easterby not being named by either Randall Cobb or Bill O'Brien in this interview, I do think speaks to something about Jack Easterby, which was he had, based on what people in the organization told me what it was like working there, very much had an ability to get people paranoid about what everybody else might be doing or saying about them. Just like creating this atmosphere of not knowing exactly where reality was. It was some diabolical BS, man. And I could never truly explain. It's all these little things that as people were telling me, they would say like, I just don't know. I'm like, I know it doesn't sound bad, but I just can't explain just how crazy it is. And that was, but that's all behind us now. Signing Jose Abreu from the start was a dumb move. Yeah, I'd tell you, well, what they paid Montero, not that Montero hasn't been productive for the Astros, it's just that that was that same thing. It was the compounding of a few different moves they've made in the last year. I love all sides of you. Thank you, Lori. Every Jose Abreu bat is an bad at bat, even on the rare occasion he gets hit. You know what? You're right. I know. It's like at least Singleton will work a pitcher. At least Singleton has the judgment at the plate. I know. B.O.B. suffered from falling in love with players and not focusing on if they're good at the footballs. 100%. I think it's a great point. I think really, too, one thing that I didn't like about Bill O'Brien was I don't think he was really good at identifying true toughness. You remember, like, we had Bruno Giacomini, and Bill O'Brien was in love with Bruno Giacomini, and he thought he was tough because Bruno Giacomini's go-to move was after he got destroyed on a pass rush, and as the guy he was supposed to be blocking tackled the quarterback, Bruno Giacomini would give him a shot in the kidneys. Like, yeah, there's a tough guy. Like, I'm all for jumping on piles, but like that's not genuine toughness. And then it was almost like he wanted to reward guys who were like, it was like rewarding your academic all-stars in college, you know, like, oh, Nick Martin, gosh, you know, he took equipment home from the weight room, and he's just a heck of a swell guy. He can't play football, but we're going to pay him like a top 5 center, and that's not Nick Martin's fault. Yet another one, man. B.O.B. suffered from that was the same approach that eventually hurt the Pats and Raiders. Bill was like being married to a toxic wife. Then you find out his sister Jack is more toxic. And they have a cousin, Brandon Cooks, who has the same toxic traits. I'm glad that's over too. I wonder if Brandon Cooks, I think part of it was just he's got a kind of a constant scowl on his face. I think that made it feel worse than it actually was. And I don't think Brandon Cooks being tight with Easterby, I think at one point, remember, Brandon Cooks knew what people were saying. And the last thing you want to be on a team is the guy that's like the coach's pet or the GM's pet if you're not also really earning it or if you haven't been there a while. And I think that's where it really started to chafe against him. And then he got mad, and then he stayed mad at the Texans for paying him way more money than they should have. Now, that was a Caserio contract too. So Caserio, if one day when I'm feeling more negative towards Nick, which I'm not at all right now, maybe I'll come up with a list of Caserio's worst mistakes, because they all make mistakes, as Bill O'Brien would tell you. But it's batting average, man, or OPS, whichever metric you want to use these days. Anybody else get the urge to want to punch O'Brien whenever you see or hear him after the way he screwed the Texans? At the beginning of me playing those 2 clips, I didn't, but now I understand your sentiment. I get it. What does DJ Swearinger have to say? B.O.B. believed in his own philosophy too much. Yeah. And I think, honestly, one of the things about Jack Easterby was that I think he was probably really good as a character coach. Team chaplain in Kansas City, character coach in New England. And I think he was probably really, really good in that role. Bill Belichick seemed to think so. And all of a sudden, I think he gave a hell of a pitch to how he could be utilized better to both, you know, the McNairs and Bill O'Brien, and he sold them on him. And it's almost like a motivational speaker is really, really good at getting you hyped up and pumped up about operating a certain way and thinking outside the box and doing all those things. But a lot of those motivational speakers are not the guys you want to be the CEO or CFO or COO of your company. It's a different skill set. And guys like Jack Easterby, for whatever they're worth, because he did do, Jack Easterby, just like Bill O'Brien said with the contract, Jack Easterby did do some good things for the team. It was the manner in which he did them and how he treated people, and then some of the true lunatic fringe stuff on the contract side and player side that was just weird. Like, there could have been a spot for him on an NFL team. It just couldn't be co-GM. And that boils up to really the McNairs ultimately and allowing all that to happen. But I think the other part of it is that there was a transition period there from when Bob McNair took over and Cal McNair was in charge, where I think Cal was just trying to find his way. And what Jack Easterby does for a guy like Cal and what he does for a guy like Bill O'Brien, who has, like Bill O'Brien has a very tough struggle in his personal life with his child and his child being sick. So I'm not trying to minimize that or talk about that flippantly at all. But I do think that a guy like Easterby can come in and almost promise to be a salve for all of the things that are hard in the organization, and especially on the interpersonal side. If you think about how Easterby was able to sell himself in New England, look, he's a great people person, and he can, as a character coach, work with these guys that a guy like, Nick Caserio, who's not a, touchy-feely, huggy type of guy, and then Bill Belichick, ditto times 10. They probably feel like they've got some blind spots and some absences there, and Jack Easterby was really good for them, and that might have been perfect for his role in New England, but he was able to do that same sell job on these guys in Houston, and it was just, gosh, it was devastating. So just watch out, everybody. I read a book on gaslighting, actually, while all this was going on, because I just needed to know, like, why are they saying these things? Why am I being talked to like I'm this stupid? And then I realized, like, oh, there's a bit of gaslighting. The buzzword that, when I hear a buzzword that I don't understand, I try to do a deep dive on it. And back in the day, we just called them psycho head games. Have there been any former Patriots coaches that have had success outside of New England? O'Brien remains the most successful former Patriots coach. Or a Belichick era coach. Some people would try to throw Vrabel in there. I don't buy that he's in the coaching tree because he was never there. You could maybe Cliff Kingsbury, who hasn't had a winning season in quite some time. Cliff Kingsbury was one year when he was released or injured as a backup quarterback in New England, he sat in with the coaches. So I suppose we could maybe put him on the list. Yeah, the personnel people have done a lot better. There's quite a few personnel guys that have gone through and done well as either GMs or personnel people otherwise. Like my pet theory for it, really, because if you look at, like, say, Kyle Shanahan versus Bill Belichick, it's night and day. Kyle Shanahan, I think, hires a certain type of coach perhaps that has more future head coach type of characteristics. And I don't know, I don't think he's necessarily thinking that's why he wants to hire him. It's just those are the types of personalities that he likes. And then Kyle Shanahan spends a lot of time with his assistant coaches, kind of grooming them and preparing them for what they might face when they interview for head coaching jobs and when they have the job. So, like, that's just, I think that's his way of, one way he can attract good assistants and really bright people is that they can look at that as, okay, this is a springboard and I can do something with it. The other side of it is that I think Belichick just hired guys who were not people. Other than, Romeo Crennel, who he'd been with forever, and Charlie Weiss, whatever the hell he is. He's a three-people person, but he's not a people person necessarily. But, like, when you get into the guys that grew up underneath Bill Belichick, I mean, your Matt Patricias, your McDaniels, your Bill O'Brien, and Bill O'Brien had other influences before he got to Houston, before he got to New England. But they don't have great people skills. And I think there's that emotional intelligence that a lot of them are lack just because that's the type of guy that Bill Belichick hires. So it doesn't mean like I don't think he infects them with some kind of virus. I wouldn't put it past him, but still. B.O.B. is more of a fun interview than D'Amico. D'Amico's a boring interview, which is good. I think that's what D'Amico's never going to give, well, especially when it comes to football matters. He doesn't give up too much. O'Brien could be a fun interview either because it was volatile and entertaining, or I do think that over time he would do sit-down interviews, I think, where he got a little bit philosophical about things. I think that'll happen with D'Amico over time as he starts to just feel more comfortable in the role. Not that I need him to be a motivational speaker, the likes of Jack Easterby or anything. I'm going to get out of here. I apologize for the sound issues yet again. We finally got them cleared up by the time Randall Cobb hit. And thank you, everybody, for joining me on a Friday afternoon. And I'll try to do this again at least once or twice next week. Thanks, everybody.